A quiet afternoon interrupted. Greenfield Park basked in the warmth of a sunny afternoon, a sanctuary where children played, joggers passed through, and families enjoyed picnics under sprawling oak trees. Among them, Marcus Carter, a bright 14-year-old, leaned against an ancient oak, clutching his backpack. School had just let out, and Marcus often came to this park to unwind before his mother, Evelyn Carter, picked him up after work. Marcus wasn't just any teenager. He loved this park, sketching its scenery in his notebook, and often spent his time drawing the landscape or imagining fantastical worlds. Today, however, his mind was far from his usual creative musings. He was preoccupied with thoughts of an upcoming school project, scribbling down ideas on a sheet of paper. Marcus barely noticed Linda Wilkes, a middle-aged woman sitting on a nearby bench, observing him with narrowed eyes. Linda's morning had been fraught with frustration. Her plans to relax in the park after a heated disagreement with her neighbor had been interrupted by what she perceived as an unsettling sight, a black teenager alone, loitering near the playground. Her biases, deeply rooted and unchecked, began to churn. She convinced herself Marcus was up to no good, despite his calm demeanor and evident lack of wrongdoing. As Marcus continued to jot down notes, Linda's discomfort grew. Her eyes darted toward a group of children playing nearby. What if he's dangerous, she thought. She'd read too many sensationalized news articles that stoked her fears, and her imagination filled in gaps where logic should have prevailed. She stood abruptly, clutching her purse. With purposeful strides, she approached Marcus, her face set in a mask of authority. "Excuse me," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the tranquil air. Marcus looked up, startled by her tone. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice steady but polite. "What are you doing here?" Linda demanded, folding her arms. "This is a family park. You can't just hang around and loiter." Marcus blinked, confusion clouding his face. "I'm just waiting for my mom, ma'am. She's picking me up soon. I always come here after school." Linda's frown deepened. "I don't believe you," she said bluntly. "Kids like you don't just sit around waiting. You're probably causing trouble." Her words hit Marcus like a blow. He'd faced moments of prejudice before but never so blatantly. "I'm not causing any trouble," he said, trying to remain calm. "I'm just sitting here." But Linda wasn't interested in explanations. Pulling out her phone, she began dialing. "I'm calling the police," she declared, her voice rising. "We'll see about this." "Ma'am, please," Marcus said, standing now, his hands open in a gesture of peace. "You don't need to do that. My mom will be here any minute." But Linda wasn't listening. She was already speaking to the 911 dispatcher, painting Marcus as a suspicious figure loitering near the playground. "He's just standing here, looking shady," she said into the phone, her tone urgent. "I'm worried about the safety of the families here." Marcus stood frozen, his heart pounding. He'd heard the stories, seen the videos. Encounters like this rarely ended well for young black men. He glanced around, hoping someone might intervene, but the few bystanders present either avoided his gaze or looked on with uncertainty. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens filled the air. 2 police cruisers pulled into the park, their lights flashing. Linda stepped back, satisfied that her call was being taken seriously, while Marcus's stomach twisted in knots. He took a deep breath, remembering his mother's advice, always stay calm. Keep your hands visible. Speak respectfully. The officers exited their vehicles, surveying the scene with practiced eyes. The taller of the two, Officer Graham, approached Linda. "What seems to be the problem here, ma'am?" he asked, his tone professional but firm. Linda pointed a finger at Marcus. "That boy has been hanging around here for hours," she said, her voice filled with righteous indignation. "I asked him to leave, but he refused. I'm worried about the kids playing nearby." Officer Graham turned to Marcus, his gaze assessing. "Is that true, son?" he asked. "No, sir," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "I've only been here for about 20 minutes, waiting for my mom to pick me up. I wasn't bothering anyone." The second officer, Officer Banks, stepped forward. "Do you have any ID?" he asked, his hand resting on his belt. "I'm only 14, sir," Marcus replied. "I don't have an ID." The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus could feel the weight of the officer's scrutiny, their suspicion palpable despite his calm demeanor. He glanced toward the park's entrance, silently willing his mother to arrive. As if answering his unspoken prayer, the low growl of an engine reached his ears. A sleek black SUV rolled into the park, its polished exterior gleaming in the sunlight. Marcus exhaled in relief, recognizing the vehicle immediately. The officer's postures stiffened as the SUV came to a stop. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a tall, composed woman with an air of authority that commanded attention. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, Evelyn Carter, the mayor of Greenfield, strode toward the group with measured steps. The onlookers, including Linda, watched in stunned silence as Mayor Carter approached. Her gaze swept over the scene, taking in her son standing rigidly, the officers flanking him, and the woman who had called the police. "What's going on here?" Mayor Carter asked, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the tension like a knife. Officer Graham cleared his throat, suddenly aware of who he was addressing. "We received a call about a suspicious individual in the park," he said, his tone more measured now. "This young man here." "That young man is my son," Mayor Carter interrupted, her voice as steady as her gaze. "And he's not suspicious. He's waiting for me, as he does every afternoon." The color drained from Linda's face as realization dawned. She opened her mouth to speak but no words came out. The weight of her actions, her baseless assumptions, and the consequences of her prejudice hit her like a freight train. The park fell silent, all eyes on Mayor Carter as she turned to Linda, her expression unreadable. "I'd like to hear your explanation," she said, her tone polite but laced with steel. "Why did you feel the need to call the police on my son?" Linda stammered, her confidence evaporating under the mayor's piercing gaze. I thought. I didn't know," she began, but the words faltered and died. Marcus, standing beside his mother, felt a surge of pride. For the first time that afternoon, he allowed himself to breathe, knowing he was no longer alone in this. The stage was set for a reckoning that would expose not just Linda's biases but the broader issues of prejudice and systemic injustice that still plagued their community. Evelyn Carter was not just a mother defending her son, she was a leader determined to turn this moment into a lesson for everyone present. The mayor's stand. The park remained silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and distant laughter of children who remained blissfully unaware of the escalating situation. All eyes were fixed on Evelyn Carter, the mayor of Greenfield, as she stood beside her son, Marcus. Her calm demeanor radiated authority, but there was an undercurrent of quiet fury in her piercing gaze as she stared at Linda Wilkes, who now shifted uncomfortably on her feet. Linda, a middle-aged woman who had prided herself on being a concerned citizen, found herself at a loss for words. The confidence she had felt just moments ago, dialing 911 with righteous indignation, had evaporated. She clutched her purse tightly as if it were an anchor in the sea of judgmental stares now directed her way. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Her assumptions about Marcus had unraveled with the arrival of his mother, and she knew she was standing on fragile ground. Evelyn, however, wasn't one to rush into confrontation. She had built her career and reputation on measured responses, using moments of tension as opportunities to educate and inspire change. But as a mother, standing before the woman who had endangered her son with unfounded accusations, she was struggling to keep her emotions in check. "Linda, isn't it?" Evelyn's voice was calm but firm, her words cutting through the silence. Linda nodded hesitantly, her gaze flickering toward the two officers who now stood awkwardly, their earlier authority seemingly diminished in the mayor's presence. Evelyn took a step closer, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. "Linda, I'm trying to understand what exactly made you feel the need to call the police on my son. You said he looked suspicious. What, exactly, was suspicious about a 14-year-old boy standing under a tree with a backpack?" Linda swallowed hard, her face flushing with embarrassment. I thought," she stammered, searching for an explanation that wouldn't make her sound like the prejudiced person she now realized she had been. "You thought what?" Evelyn pressed, her voice still steady but laced with steel. "You thought that because my son is black, he must be up to no good? That's the only explanation I can come up with." The crowd that had gathered around the scene began to murmur. Some nodded in agreement, while others looked on with a mix of discomfort and curiosity. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, their hands moving away from their belts as they realized the weight of the situation. "I didn't mean," Linda began, but Evelyn held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Let me tell you what you meant," Evelyn said, her tone rising slightly as the passion behind her words grew. "You meant to use your privilege and your biases to weaponize the police against my son. You didn't stop to think about the consequences of your actions. You didn't consider that calling the police on a young black boy could have escalated into something far more dangerous." Marcus, who had been standing quietly beside his mother, looked up at her, admiration shining in his eyes. He had seen his mother in action before, addressing city council meetings and rallying the community around important causes, but this was different. This was personal. Evelyn turned her attention to the officers. "And you," she said, her gaze piercing. "Did either of you stop to question why you were called here in the first place? Or did you simply assume that my son must be guilty because someone said so?" The taller officer, Graham, cleared his throat nervously. "We were responding to a call, ma'am." Responding to a call without questioning its validity," Evelyn interrupted. "Do you know how often black boys and men are targeted by baseless accusations like this? Do you know how often those situations end in tragedy?" The officers looked down, their earlier assertiveness now replaced by a quiet shame. Evelyn let out a slow breath, calming herself. "I'm not here to vilify anyone," she continued, her voice softening but still firm. "But I need everyone here to understand the gravity of what just happened. My son did nothing wrong. He was simply existing, and yet that was enough to make someone feel threatened. That's the reality we live in, and it's a reality we have to change." Linda's eyes filled with tears, whether from shame or the realization of her own prejudices, it was hard to tell. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Evelyn nodded, her expression softening slightly. "I appreciate your apology, Linda. But it's not me you owe an apology to. It's my son." Linda turned to Marcus, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. I made a mistake. I shouldn't have judged you. I see that now." Marcus hesitated, looking to his mother for guidance. Evelyn placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's up to you, sweetheart," she said gently. Marcus looked at Linda, his young face filled with a wisdom beyond his years. "I forgive you," he said simply. "But please don't do this to anyone else. It's not fair." Linda nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I won't," she promised. Evelyn turned back to the officers. "I trust this matter is resolved," she asked, her tone making it clear that there was only one acceptable answer. "Yes, ma'am," Officer Graham said quickly. "We'll file this as a misunderstanding." "Good," Evelyn said. She looked around at the crowd, her gaze sweeping over the faces of those who had gathered. "Let this be a lesson to all of us. Prejudice has no place in our community. We must do better, for our children, for each other, and for the future we want to build." The crowd erupted into applause, the tension that had gripped the park finally breaking. Evelyn wrapped an arm around Marcus, guiding him toward their SUV. As they walked away, Marcus looked up at his mother, his admiration for her growing with every step. "You were amazing, Mom," he said quietly. Evelyn smiled, brushing a hand over his curls. "I'm proud of you, too, Marcus. You handled yourself with grace and dignity, and that's more powerful than any words I could say." As they drove away, Evelyn couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The road to change was long and often arduous, but moments like this, however painful, were steps in the right direction. And as long as she had her son by her side, she knew they could face anything together. The ripple effect. The events in Greenfield Park that sunny afternoon began to ripple through the community before Marcus and his mother even made it home. Onlookers had recorded the confrontation, uploading videos to social media with captions that reflected a range of emotions: shock, outrage, admiration, and even guilt. Within hours, the video began to gain traction, drawing attention from local activists, community leaders, and even news outlets. By the time Evelyn Carter and Marcus stepped into their home, her phone was already buzzing with notifications. Emails, calls, and messages poured in, some expressing support and others demanding action. Evelyn sighed as she placed her keys on the counter, realizing the quiet evening she had planned with Marcus was no longer an option. Marcus, still shaken but trying to hide it, dropped his backpack by the door and sat on the couch. His mind raced with conflicting emotions. He was proud of how his mother had stood up for him, but the weight of what had happened still pressed heavily on his chest. He had always known the world could be unfair, but experiencing it so blatantly was something else entirely. Evelyn joined him, sitting down and wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "You did well today, Marcus," she said softly. "I know it wasn't easy." "I just don't get it, Mom," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. Why did she think I was dangerous?" Evelyn sighed deeply, her heart aching at the pain in her son's voice. "Because some people see what they want to see," she explained gently. "They let their fears and biases cloud their judgment. It's not fair, and it's not right, but that's why we have to stand up and show them the truth." Marcus nodded, though the answer didn't fully satisfy him. "Do you think she really meant it when she apologized?" "I hope so," Evelyn replied honestly. "But more importantly, I hope she learns from this. That's the only way we'll ever see real change." As they talked, Evelyn's phone rang, pulling her attention away. She glanced at the screen and saw the name of her chief of staff, Karen Daniels. She gave Marcus an apologetic look. "I have to take this, sweetheart. Why don't you grab a snack and try to relax? I'll be right back." Marcus nodded, heading to the kitchen as Evelyn answered the call. "Karen, what's going on?" "Evelyn, the video from the park is everywhere," Karen said, her voice tinged with urgency. "It's already been shared thousands of times, and reporters are calling non-stop. We need to get ahead of this." Evelyn rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of the situation settle on her shoulders. "What's the general reaction?" "Mostly supportive," Karen replied. "People are outraged by what happened to Marcus, and they're praising how you handled it. But there are also a few critics claiming you used your position to intimidate the officers and Linda." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "I didn't intimidate anyone. I held them accountable. There's a difference." "I know that, and most people do too," Karen assured her. "But we need to craft a statement. Something that addresses what happened and highlights the bigger issues at play." Evelyn nodded, already forming the words in her mind. "Schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning. I'll address it then." "Understood," Karen said. "And Evelyn, this could be an opportunity. People are listening. We can use this moment to push for real change." Evelyn hung up the phone and leaned back on the couch, closing her eyes for a moment. She knew Karen was right. This wasn't just about Marcus or Linda. It was about the systemic issues that allowed situations like this to happen in the first place. But as much as she wanted to focus on the broader fight for justice, her heart remained with her son. The next morning, the front lawn of City Hall was packed with reporters, activists, and community members. Evelyn stood behind a podium, her expression calm but resolute as she addressed the crowd. Yesterday, my son, Marcus, experienced what far too many people of color face every day, being judged and treated unfairly because of the way he looks, she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. As a mother, it broke my heart. As a mayor, it strengthened my resolve. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. This isn't just about one woman's actions or one police response. This is about a system that perpetuates prejudice and allows biases to go unchecked. It's about a society that still has so much work to do to ensure equality and justice for all. The crowd murmured in agreement, many nodding and holding up signs that read messages like, "Justice for all," and "End racial bias." I want to make something clear, Evelyn continued. Change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without effort. It requires all of us to take a hard look at ourselves, to confront our biases, and to hold each other accountable. That's what I hope yesterday's incident will inspire, a commitment to do better, to be better. She ended her speech with a call to action, urging the community to join her in advocating for policies and programs that promote understanding and equity. The crowd erupted into applause, the energy palpable as people rallied around her words. Back at home, Marcus watched the press conference on TV, a mixture of pride and admiration swelling in his chest. He had always known his mother was a force to be reckoned with, but seeing her use her platform to fight for something so personal made him realize just how strong she was. Bridging the divide. The fallout from the incident at Greenfield Park continued to ripple across the town. Social media buzzed with conversations ranging from heartfelt calls for change to heated debates about personal responsibility and systemic issues. Some residents expressed solidarity with Marcus and Mayor Evelyn Carter, while others doubled down on their support for Linda, claiming her actions were justified due to her concerns for safety. At the center of the storm, Linda found herself struggling with the weight of her choices. The video of her call to the police and her confrontation with Marcus had not only gone viral but had brought a level of public scrutiny she never anticipated. Friends and neighbors who once greeted her warmly now avoided her at the grocery store. Some outright confronted her, accusing her of perpetuating harmful stereotypes. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters seeking interviews or comments. Linda wasn't sure who she was angrier at, Marcus, for simply existing in that park, or herself, for letting her biases guide her actions. Deep down, though, she couldn't ignore the gnawing guilt in her heart. She had always seen herself as a good person, someone who stood for fairness and justice. But the video didn't lie. Watching herself accuse a teenage boy, who was just waiting for his mother, had forced her to confront a version of herself she didn't like. It was during one of these moments of self-reflection that Linda's daughter, Caroline, walked into the living room. Caroline, a college student who had grown up in Greenfield but now attended a university in the city, had been one of Linda's harshest critics since the incident. "Mom, can we talk?" Caroline asked, her tone softer than it had been in days. Linda nodded, bracing herself for another lecture. "Of course," she said, setting her cup of tea down on the table. Caroline sat across from her, her expression serious but not hostile. "Mom, I know this has been hard for you," she began, "but I think it's time you faced the fact that what you did wasn't just a mistake, it was part of a bigger problem." Linda frowned, her defenses rising instinctively. "I was just trying to protect the park," she said. "I didn't mean to." "To what?" Caroline interrupted. "To judge Marcus because he's black. Because that's what happened, Mom. And until you admit that, nothing is going to change." The words stung, but they also rang true. Linda's shoulders slumped as she looked at her daughter, seeing not just her child but a young woman who was holding her accountable in a way no one else could. I didn't mean for it to be about race, Linda said quietly. But I see now that it was. I don't know why I acted that way. I was scared, I guess. Caroline leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. And that's the problem, Mom. You were scared of a 14-year-old boy sitting under a tree. Why? Because he didn't look like you? Because he didn't fit your idea of who belongs in this town? You need to ask yourself those questions, and you need to do something about it. Linda nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know where to start, she admitted. Caroline smiled faintly, her compassion breaking through her frustration. Start by listening, she said. And maybe by talking to the people you hurt. Meanwhile, Evelyn Carter was navigating her own challenges. In the days following her public statement, the mayor's office had been flooded with requests for meetings, interviews, and collaborations. Activist groups wanted her support for new policies, schools invited her to speak about inclusion, and residents wrote letters both praising her actions and accusing her of exploiting the situation for political gain. Evelyn knew she couldn't please everyone, but her primary focus remained on Marcus. She had noticed subtle changes in her son since the incident. He was quieter, more reserved, and seemed hesitant to go outside alone. It broke her heart to see him carry the weight of something he didn't deserve. One evening, as they sat in the living room watching TV, Evelyn turned to Marcus and asked, "How are you feeling about everything?" Marcus shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "I don't know. I guess I'm okay." Evelyn reached over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Marcus, it's okay to not be okay. What happened to you was wrong, and it's normal to feel upset about it." Marcus hesitated before finally speaking. "It's just. I didn't think it would be this big of a deal. Now everyone's talking about it, and I feel like they're all looking at me differently. Like I'm some kind of victim or something." "You're not a victim," Evelyn said firmly. "You're a survivor. And what happened to you is shining a light on something that needs to change. That's not a bad thing." The ripple effect. The meeting between Evelyn and Linda marked the beginning of a slow but meaningful transformation. While the apology had been a critical step, the real work was just beginning, and it wasn't just about Linda. The incident in Greenfield Park had sparked a much-needed conversation across the town. People were forced to confront their own biases, their complicity in systems that perpetuated inequality, and their role in creating a more inclusive community. The mayor's office became a hub of activity as Evelyn launched a series of initiatives aimed at fostering understanding and dismantling prejudice. She announced a town hall meeting to address the concerns raised by the incident and invited local leaders, residents, and community organizations to participate. The event, titled "Building Bridges, Confronting Bias Together," was scheduled to take place in the high school auditorium, a venue large enough to accommodate the anticipated turnout. For Marcus, life hadn't entirely returned to normal. The viral video of his encounter had made him somewhat of an unwilling celebrity, and he often caught people staring at him in the hallways at school or whispering as he passed by. Some classmates expressed their support, while others avoided him altogether, unsure of what to say. Despite the mixed reactions, Marcus carried himself with quiet dignity, inspired by his mother's unwavering strength. One afternoon, Marcus was sitting in his room, scrolling through the messages he'd received on social media. Among the flood of comments, one message stood out. It was from a boy named Dylan, a classmate Marcus barely knew. Dylan's message was simple but heartfelt. "Hey Marcus, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for not speaking up when I saw what happened in the park. I didn't know what to do, but I realize now that staying silent wasn't right. If there's ever anything I can do to help, let me know." Marcus stared at the message for a moment, then typed a reply. "Thanks, Dylan. It means a lot. Maybe we can start by having a conversation." As the date of the town hall approached, the anticipation in Greenfield grew. Flyers were posted around town, local businesses displayed signs encouraging attendance, and the high school's debate team volunteered to help moderate the event. Evelyn worked tirelessly to ensure the meeting would be productive and inclusive, reaching out to community leaders and even inviting experts on racial equity to share their insights. Linda, too, was preparing for the event. She had agreed to share her story, a decision that filled her with equal parts dread and determination. Caroline had helped her craft a speech, and while the words didn't come easily, Linda knew they were necessary. She wanted to show her community, and herself, that she was committed to change. The night of the town hall arrived, and the auditorium was packed. The atmosphere was charged with a mix of tension and hope as people took their seats, murmuring in hushed tones. Marcus sat in the front row with his mother, his heart pounding as he looked around the room. He spotted familiar faces, friends, teachers, neighbors, and even a few people he didn't expect to see, like the police officers who had responded to the call in the park. Evelyn stepped onto the stage, her presence commanding attention. The room fell silent as she approached the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice steady but warm. "Thank you for being here tonight. What happened in our park was a painful reminder that we still have work to do as a community. But it also presented an opportunity, a chance to grow, to learn, and to come together. Tonight, we're going to have some honest conversations, and I hope we can all leave here with a better understanding of how we can move forward." The audience applauded, their enthusiasm tempered by the gravity of the topic. Evelyn introduced the evening's agenda, which included remarks from community leaders, a panel discussion, and an open forum for residents to share their thoughts. When it was Linda's turn to speak, the room grew noticeably quieter. She walked to the podium, clutching her speech in trembling hands. Her eyes scanned the audience, landing briefly on Marcus, whose calm gaze gave her a small measure of comfort. "Good evening," she began, her voice shaky but resolute. "My name is Linda, and I'm here tonight because I made a mistake that hurt not only Marcus and his family but also this community. I let my fear and my biases cloud my judgment, and for that, I am deeply sorry." Linda paused, taking a deep breath as she fought back tears. "I've spent the past few weeks reflecting on my actions and the impact they had. I've learned that apologies are important, but they're not enough. Real change requires action, and I'm committed to doing the work, whether it's through educating myself, having difficult conversations, or supporting initiatives that promote equity." Her words were met with a mix of reactions. Some nodded in approval, while others remained skeptical. Linda didn't expect immediate forgiveness, but she hoped her vulnerability would at least plant a seed of understanding. The panel discussion that followed was both enlightening and challenging. Speakers shared personal stories of discrimination, while experts provided context on systemic racism and offered strategies for fostering inclusion. One of the most powerful moments came when Marcus was invited to share his perspective. Standing at the microphone, Marcus took a moment to gather his thoughts. "I didn't ask for any of this to happen," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "All I wanted was to wait for my mom in the park. But what happened showed me that we can't ignore these issues, they're real, and they affect people every day." He looked directly at Linda, who met his gaze with a tearful nod. "I appreciate your apology," Marcus continued. "But I hope this is just the beginning. We all have a role to play in making this community better, for everyone." The audience erupted into applause, the room filled with a palpable sense of unity and resolve. By the end of the evening, the town hall had accomplished more than Evelyn had hoped. It had not only sparked important conversations but had also laid the groundwork for meaningful action. Residents left the auditorium with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to create a community where everyone felt safe and valued. For Marcus, the event marked a turning point. While he knew there would still be challenges ahead, he felt empowered by the support of his community and inspired by the progress they had made together. And as he walked out of the auditorium hand in hand with his mother, he couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope for the future. The path to redemption and unity. The night of the town hall had been a resounding success, but for Evelyn Carter, her son Marcus, and even Linda, it was only the beginning of a much longer journey. The events that followed would test their resolve, their ability to forgive, and the community's willingness to grow beyond its old prejudices. The morning after. The morning after the town hall, Evelyn sat at her desk in City Hall, sipping her coffee as the sunlight streamed through the large windows. The phone on her desk had been ringing non-stop, and her email inbox was flooded with messages. Some were words of encouragement and gratitude for her leadership, while others were filled with vitriol, criticizing her for exposing the town's underbelly. Evelyn had expected this. Change was never easy, and there were always those who resisted it. Her thoughts were interrupted when Marcus entered her office, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You look like you need this," he said, placing one on her desk with a small smile. Evelyn chuckled, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Thank you, sweetheart. How are you holding up after last night?" Marcus sat down across from her, his expression thoughtful. "It was a lot," he admitted. "But seeing the way people responded, the way some of them really listened, it felt worth it. I just hope it's not all talk, you know." Evelyn nodded, her face softening with pride. "It won't be. Not if I have anything to say about it. And neither will you, I imagine." Marcus grinned. "Yeah, I think I've got some work to do too." Linda's turning point. Linda woke up that morning with a heavy heart but also a newfound determination. The applause she had received at the town hall for her heartfelt apology had surprised her, but the real work lay ahead. She had spent years living in a bubble of unconscious biases, and dismantling those beliefs would take time and effort. As she sat at her kitchen table, staring at her untouched cup of tea, her daughter Caroline walked in and sat beside her. Caroline, who had been her fiercest critic in the aftermath of the incident, now looked at her mother with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "You were brave last night," Caroline said softly, breaking the silence. Linda looked up, her eyes glistening. "I don't feel brave. I feel ashamed. But I know I can't stay stuck there. I want to do better, for you, for this community, and for myself." Caroline reached for her mother's hand. "Then let's start today. There's a workshop on racial bias at the library this afternoon. Want to come with me?" Linda hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Yes. I'd like that." Building bridges. Over the next few weeks, the seeds planted at the town hall began to bear fruit. Evelyn launched a new community program called Building Bridges, which focused on education, empathy, and action. The program included workshops on implicit bias, forums for open dialogue, and mentorship opportunities for young people of color. Marcus, inspired by the overwhelming support he had received, volunteered to help lead one of the youth mentorship programs. He spent afternoons working with younger kids, sharing his experiences and encouraging them to believe in their potential, regardless of the obstacles they faced. One day, while helping a group of kids with a community art project, Marcus was approached by Dylan, the classmate who had sent him the heartfelt message after the park incident. "Hey, Marcus," Dylan said, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "I was wondering if I could help out. I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the town hall, and I want to be part of the solution." Marcus smiled, clapping Dylan on the shoulder. "Of course. The more, the better." Linda's journey. Linda became a regular attendee of the workshops and forums, often accompanied by Caroline. At first, she felt out of place, but as she listened to others share their stories and began to confront her own biases, she found herself growing in ways she hadn't thought possible. One day, she approached Evelyn after a particularly emotional workshop. "Mayor Carter," Linda began, her voice trembling, "I just wanted to thank you. For your patience, for your leadership, and for not giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve it." Evelyn looked at Linda, her expression thoughtful. "Change is hard, Linda. But the fact that you're here, doing the work, that's what matters." We all have a role to play in making this town better, and I'm glad you found yours. A community transformed. Months passed, and the effects of the Building Bridges program were evident throughout Greenfield. The local schools integrated lessons on diversity and inclusion into their curriculum, and businesses displayed signs reading "Everyone Welcome" in their windows. The park where the incident had occurred became a symbol of the town's transformation, hosting monthly community picnics that brought people together across racial and socio-economic lines. For Marcus, life had changed in ways he hadn't anticipated. He had gone from being a quiet, introspective teenager to a confident young leader, inspired by his mother's example and the resilience of his community. His experiences had taught him the power of using his voice, not just for himself, but for others who might not yet have found theirs. A full circle moment. One sunny afternoon, Marcus was sitting under the oak tree in Greenfield Park, the same spot where the incident had occurred. This time, though, he wasn't alone. A group of kids from the mentorship program surrounded him, laughing and chatting as they worked on their latest art project. As they painted a mural on a large canvas, a shadow fell across Marcus. He looked up to see Linda standing there, holding a tray of lemonade. "Thought you all might be thirsty," she said, a shy smile on her face. Marcus stood and took the tray, his smile warm. "Thanks, Mrs. Collins. We appreciate it." Linda lingered for a moment, watching the kids as they painted. "You're doing something really special here, Marcus," she said quietly. "Thank you for giving this town hope." Marcus nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "We're all in this together, Mrs. Collins." As Linda walked away, Marcus turned back to the kids, his gaze lingering on the mural they were creating. It depicted a bridge spanning a river, with people of all races and ages walking across it, their hands joined in unity. For Marcus, for Evelyn, for Linda, and for the entire town of Greenfield, the journey was far from over. But in that moment, under the shade of the oak tree, it was clear that they were heading in the right direction, together.